mystery genres tend to be about getting things wrong. If the reader doesn't get things wrong, the reader is disappointed. So much in life militates against that. If we get things wrong, we tend, or some of us anyway, to punish ourselves or feel deflated. But in mysteries, when you get things wrong, you're kind of delighted for a while.
Welcome to the musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
I'm John Timpane.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
We are proud to welcome back, once again, novelist and poet Lee Upton.
Thank you both so much for having me and having me again. I really appreciate it.
Lee Upton is Professor Emerita of English from Lafayette College, where she and I were for a couple of golden years. We worked at the same English department together, and we still like each other. And the novel is called Wrongful. Very much recommended. We've all read it, all three of us, and one of us wrote it. And we're going to talk to the writer about it, and hopefully you folks will listen and go out and get your own copies, because really, it is really fun to read for a lot of different reasons, and we'll get into that. First of all, if someone had said to me, I'm going to set a novel, we're going to start the novel in a writer's conference, I think the first thing I would do as an agent would, first of all, shoot myself in the face and then ask why. But I'd like to talk about just that beginning and that setting. Was that setting something that occurred to you first and then the novel followed, or did that happen in the kind of way that it does where you're working with structure and you say, this is where I'll start?
I'll say structure was probably very much part of what I was thinking about when I wrote the novel. The novel is set at 2 literary conferences, so it's deadly twice, I guess.
No, and I don't mean to say that either.
But yes, you do.
Yeah, and it concerns the fate of a woman who disappears at the first conference, and then later a woman who'd been at that conference, who's a reader rather than a writer, returns 10 years later when there's a commemorative conference in homage to the writer who disappeared. And the young reader, Geneva Finch, tries to figure out what really happened. So to answer your question about why a literary conference, the novel grew out of a short story, the same short story that my previous novel, Tabitha, Get Up, grew out of. And I did set myself a kind of structural challenge with this novel. Many of my stories or other works of fiction often are either first person or follow one character very tightly. And with this, I told myself, I want to move in and out of various minds. And so structurally, the beginning of the novel is one in which we follow we follow multiple characters. We're inside their wicked little minds. And then the next portion of the novel, we follow a woman named Geneva Finch, who's a young woman who's a reader who came to the conference out of admiration for Mira Wallace, the writer the conference is focused on. And then at the very end of the novel, we go again into multiple minds, but they're labeled in a way. So structurally, I wanted to do something that was a little bit of a challenge for myself, but also will allow me to focus on the mechanics so that my inspiration doesn't dry up or I'd get too doubtful and fearful. As why a literary conference might be interesting is because I think that envy is interesting, and I think guilt is interesting, and evil is interesting, and all of those factors can be at work in any kind of conference, I think, where people get together and in some ways may unconsciously or consciously measure themselves.
I'm interested in your writing process too on this. You were talking about structure being the kickoff, you setting up where everybody was going to be and where they were going to go. But there is a time jump in there, like you said. It goes from one conference to another, so there is a lapse of years in between a couple of chapters there before you take up the second conference and the cause of the heroine. So I'm wondering. Did you write the whole first part and then set it aside and then go into the second part, or were there a little bit here and well, I can go back and change this and forward this story and maybe I should go back and tweak that part of the story? In other words, was it always fluid, or did you have things sort of set and followed in a procession?
It wasn't always fluid. In fact, for the longest time, I didn't know who the culprit was. I felt almost every character seemed capable of doing something really heinous, and some of them do and had done so. There was this, but in another way, because it grew from a short story that had much of the plot elements in it. It was about a literary conference. Some of the dialogue was the same, but the short story was faulty because it prematurely closed. And I realized I couldn't handle the plot within a short story. There had to be many more little panels and possibilities. So then it started opening and opening more. I also, the character Geneva Finch, who tries to figure out the mystery, I have to confess that I understood her very well because I borrowed some of my own experiences. And in fact, the novel partly grew out of my first experiences in my 20s when I first went to writing conferences, and I was very naive and just full of adoration for writers. Not that I'm still some sounds horrible. Some of my best friends are writers, but what I witnessed was not what I expected. I mean, I saw kind of an older woman humiliated. I saw, some outright hostility, but I also saw tremendous generosity and kindness and inspiration and a kind of givingness too. So, in thinking about a writing conference, I think it's just a way that you get people, particularly writers, who are involved in a lot of hard work, but there may not be a product to show for it. If you make cakes, you can show a cake. If you're a writer, you could write for many, many years, and you might not have something to show for it. So there's so many ways in which there's a kind of vulnerability to writers that I think is really interesting. And I think too that a lot of it comes from loving the mysteries as a genre. I remember a difficult time in my life when I was kind of filled with these fears and regrets. I started reading Agatha Christie at night and just allowing my mind to focus on those details and the logic of the plots really helped me to move out of my little parochial fears and regrets and to move my mind in another direction. So partly the novel comes from my sort of love of the form. I'll quote Kate Rakulia, another Pennsylvania writer, novelist, wonderful woman. She visited one of my classes at Lafayette College and told the students and the rest of us that, in some ways, all writers are mysteries. They're always about secrets and revelations. And that was very helpful to me, too, to think that in some ways, all of us are continually writing mysteries. We're always trying to figure out, what happened and how can we, sort of open that up for readers. So Wrongful comes out partly out of my experiences, my love of other writers, my admiration for so many writers, my love of the mystery genre, which I think is helpful to people. It's a helpful genre. It lets us deal with mortality in kind of a safe way. And it also, I think, was an exciting challenge to work through.
It's something that you said about the mystery genre that I just want to run by you. And this, I'm not putting down art novels because I read them every day and I'm committed to them. Won't ever stop. Love them. Love the whole history, and still consume them at an alarming rate for my friends. But I think that the mystery genre is a challenge to anybody who writes, in the sense that mystery writers are, first of all, they're consummate technicians. The really best ones. They know how to put something together, and often that's the biggest problem for any writer, is how to just put a story together and make it sing. But story, character, motive, it's got to be there. I'm not saying there's a cookbook recipe, although yeah, there's kind of is. But the best keep us in the dark and challenge us to make our minds up. So there's that part of it too, of challenging the reader to pay attention, try to figure it out. There's that whole, so in all those ways, I think it has challenged writers to be better when they write novels.
Well, it certainly was a challenge for me. It's called Wrongful, partly because I've got so much wrong in my life. Life just continually humbles a person, and also I think the mystery genres tend to be about getting things wrong. If the reader doesn't get things wrong, the reader is disappointed. So much in life militates against that. If we get things wrong, we tend, or some of us anyway, to punish ourselves or feel deflated. But in mysteries, when you get things wrong, you're kind of delighted for a while. Eventually, you want to get things right. But you also, along the way, if the guesses are too easy, you feel somehow cheated. So I think there's something about mysteries that gives us kind of practice in getting things wrong,
Very
and
nice.
being self-forgiving, and almost enjoying the process. I love the mystery genres for all the kind of twists and turns. And as a writer, I felt also that I had to let the plot outwit me a lot. I had to, kind of, not quite know what I was doing, and then but keep moving ahead. And then, as Don says, been a lot of going backwards and rethinking it and refiguring it out, but without tying it up too much at a bow. I think even with Agatha Christie, often there's something in there that doesn't quite fit, and I think that's also why mysteries are appealing. Somehow there's a ragged edge to a mystery, and there's so much about motivation. Why would people do what they do? And I also, I think with this mystery, I was really interested in evil, and how, I thought of it as kind of the vitality of evil, how a person can be malignant and enjoy it in some ways, and enjoy their own kind of cleverness. And then at the same time, I have to be careful not to give anything away. I think there's a tiny moment where the person, my culprit, realizes that there's the possibility of additional loneliness in this person's life. So I think there's just something so freeing about working within this. It also, the last novel was a comic novel, which I really set out to write a comic novel. And this one, it has, I hope, its comic moments, but the cast of characters are pretty broad here. So controlling them was a different sort of challenge, but no less of a challenge.
One of the interesting things about your main character, Miss Finch, is that it I don't want to say it's exactly the opposite of an Agatha Christie novel, but when Poirot or Miss Marple comes into a Agatha Christie novel, you kind of have the idea that they have it figured out, and they're just going to let situations play out to go along with what they've already figured out. But Geneva Finch doesn't have that. And it kind of reminds me, I recently went to a local production of The Da Vinci Code as a play, and seeing it and having read the book when it first came out hundreds of years ago, or however long it did, seeing it stripped down in play form to just the basics of the novel, that protagonist Langdon is also runs through most of it like he has no idea where he is or what's going on, and things have to come to him in such a way that he uses it to make sense and forward the plot. And that's kind of the same feeling I got from Geneva, that she really is, she has this idea that she wants to solve the mystery of the disappearance of her favorite writer. And then from there, she kind of has an idea of where to go, but really not. and that situations sort of overtake her at some point. So I get the idea that maybe that's sort of an every person that you've built into that novel, where Geneva and us are kind of, on the same level, and the novel happens around us, and we can be as surprised as she is about what happens as the novel progresses. Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, I like everything you've said, because, I've heard her referred to as a detective, but she's really not. She is kind of in every person in some ways. She's hounded by a sense of guilt in some ways. She's hounded also by the loss of her mother. One of the surprising things for me is, I think when you write a mystery, you're also trying to find a mystery in your own life. And I mean, the novel told me, how much I'm still mourning my mother, the loss of my mother. But there's, with her, she doesn't have any particular gifts, other than persistence, and the kind of persistence of guilt, and also, the sense that she wants to relieve herself from a burden. She doesn't have a lot of even hope that this will work, but rather than not taking action, she will take action, and she will talk to people. They all seem guilty to her in one way or another. She is an every person, because sometimes she jumps to conclusions, and disastrously, at least for a while. She also, another thing too that she has is, she has a kind of physical awareness, and it's probably built from tending her mother as a very young person. Her mother was terminally ill for a long period, and she was, as a very young person, was the primary caretaker. So she is very much physically aware of when people are not going to help her, when they will. She's sort of physically aware of danger in some ways. So she's a kind of intuitive character, which I think we all have to be in some ways. So as a very young woman, she faced a lot of poverty, not enough help from the government for her mother or from any agencies. So she has somehow has to use those particular skills, her persistence, and also her sort of physical awareness of danger around herself. But we all have that. Don't you have that when you're in a room and it looks like no one else is there at first, but then you're aware there's a human presence there. You feel that presence. And that's never that's never been dimmed too much for her. There's that 10-year jump. She's perhaps not as intuitive or physically attuned later as she was as a very young person, but still she has those abilities, and they're going to help her. So she's so different from, a Mrs. Marple or, Perrault, or these other characters who work kind of on a different level and are aware of their skills.
Have those little gray brain cells working.
Yeah.
Now, as for whether the book is funny or not, I will say that there are some one-liners that are just precious. And there's a woman who says, "I have a very good memory for pickles," which I had to stop reading for a moment and just chuckle for like 5 minutes. I mean, it has something to do with something, right? Something to do with something in the plot, but still it's funny. There's a poetry reading that somebody goes to that is described as being scolded by someone with hiccups. just amazing. I thought, oh, so she knows. And, and then there's someone else who says, I'll be fine, as long as I can talk to myself. I'm always my own best listener. you know, and it's both sad, but there's something about it that makes you snicker and sort of cock your nostril a little bit. Go, yeah, okay. So I mean, there's a wicked. You are wicked, Lee Upton. A wicked thing going on. I wanted to talk about. We talked a lot about structure, and this is not going to let any cats out of any bags. But as Don and I were talking about neurotic women in this novel, and Don was saying some interesting things about them. There's a gallery. And we get to meet them not once, but actually there's this iterative thing that you do, and I'm not going to give it away, but we get to meet them. We get to make a tour of these women 3 times. And each time we do it, it's a little different and it's a little more informative. And 2 out of the 3 times it's much less informative, but it sure throws the fog up, and there's just too much to bring up. So you project us into that sweet spot. I think most really good mysteries have a sweet spot where you cannot know what's coming. There's even what's the famous movie with Humphrey Bogart? Not the Maltese Falcon. Maltese Falcon has a great 10 minutes there where you're if you're seeing it for the first time, you do not know what's going to happen. It's very surreal, and Sam Spade is trying to figure things out. He just can't. What's the one after him with Lauren Bacall? Don, do you remember?
Have not.
Is it Key Largo? Or?
Those all have Lauren Bacall in them. Anyway, it is a very famous guy wrote it without even knowing.
Oh, Dashiell Hammett wrote it.
Well, Dashiell Hammett wrote the Maltese Falcon. The one I'm thinking of, another very fine writer of mysteries, was hired to write it, and he never figured lots of it out. They had to finish the movie.
Raymond Chandler?
Yes, it was Raymond Chandler, and he just never figured all of it out. I mean, they were begging him right down to the end, and he ended up sneaking out of town so no one would ask him anymore. And they had to, which I think is good of Raymond to do, but it's still I like that movie for it's that imperfection is you're left thinking, oh man, I didn't find that out. I found out other stuff, but it's, and I love your point about sort of the deckle-edgedness of a good mystery, that there can be collateral damage that is not fully explained, or you know what I mean? Because I think discovery is never clean.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Don?
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, plus the other thing is that you have populated the people around Geneva, the women at the conference, for example, and even the people that help her out in her quest, with some catty people, some people who are just as in the dark as Geneva, maybe even more in the dark. I'm thinking of a woman that's by her side a lot that seems to have less going on than Geneva does. I mean, in other words, there are a lot of different personality traits for her to bounce off of and try to figure out which one of these people might have contributed to whatever went on. It's a disappearance that turns into something else. Again, I don't think I'm letting anything out of the bag, but it's just one of those things where as you get deeper and deeper into the novel, things get a little twistier, don't they?
Mm-hmm. It's delectable. Yeah, it's delectable meeting all these people again and again. And they are a bunch of let's just call them, personalities. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Thank you for this. Yeah, they are a kind of a rogues gallery, and there's a publicist or a publisher rather, an agent. One of my favorite characters is Louise Chaudette, who I realized that, and I've mentioned this to some friends, that she probably would call herself Louisa Chaudet rather than Chaudette. And I particularly like her because she vacillates between a kind of self-glorification to self-deflation. So she really can self-deprecate, but then in other moments is very much, feels a kind of magnificence of her being. So I sort of adore her. I will say it was really fun to write terrible thoughts. And but I know in my previous novel, Tabitha Get Up, I had so much fun with the mother who says such terrible things to her own daughter. But I think there's something about, working with a shadow sensibility that's very generative for anyone, to think, or not even think, but kind of project these thoughts. I noticed too, something I learned from the characters was one way they handle their kind of hostility toward the writer that the festival was supposed to champion, or Mira Wallace. They channel their anger at her by projecting onto her. They say that a number of them, as you recall, will say that she really borrows plots from them, or their language from them, or she takes something from them. So I thought that was interesting, that was a way for them to somehow corral their own rage somehow. And I think of Mira Wallace, the writer who disappears, that we only see her for a short time in chapter 4, but I think I really thought in some ways she's a kind of mirror image of Geneva Finch, which helps explain why this very young woman would go on to want to solve this mystery. And I think both of them, the sense of the loss of a mother, the loss of adequate support, the sense of being misunderstood, also the sense of not really having, a clear pathway is very much something that happens, that's part of the fabric of both characters. I must say, a character that I really enjoyed writing, who's a peripheral character, is Ada, who is so polymorphously sexual. I never know where she's going. And she's so fun-loving. But in the end, I'm not giving anything away, but there is a way in which she is a kind of force of life in the midst of a lot of death here, and a lot of disappearances, and a lot of dehumanization. That's, which is something I think happens so often, to celebrities. We don't really think of writers anymore as celebrities, but within that closed little world of the writing conference, one character is a celebrity, and Mira Wallace, and like a celebrity, they're dehumanizing or leveling elements that try to restrict her, but then in the end dehumanize that gallery of characters themselves.
I was very entertained at the ways, the myriad ways in which envy is expressed. Like there are times when people believe they have seen themselves portrayed in one of Mira's novels. There are times when people are resentful that they have not been portrayed in one of Mira's novels. There are times when we hear that they have taken something that has happened in Mira's novels as a comment on their own lives. And this talks about that projection that you talk about. I mean, that is what stories are supposed to do. They're supposed to prompt emotions and feelings and sometimes introspection. And here it's going very much awry. So again, that's yet another thing. It's not a crime to do such things, but there is something wrongful about it when we think about it. That you're doing wrong to somebody to think of them that way, to say, oh, well, she obviously hated me so much that she made this character do that. You know what I'm trying to say? It's that kind of circuitous, and yet when you think about the setting, understandable and diseased thinking.
Well, I must say that, I think that envy is a really interesting emotion, and very useful one. I think if people never felt envy, we might just never exceed ourselves, or envy is dangerous, I think, when it's combined with inertia, when people are static and don't do anything about it. If you envy someone, it may be because they're doing something that secretly you would like to do or could learn to do. There's that'll say, I don't envy professional basketball players at my height. Okay. It's not going to happen. I'm never going to envy them. But, other writers, of course, it would be easy to envy them, and the only cure is being grateful and moving back into one's own work. But I think sometimes people, I mean, maybe it's an evolutionary trait, envy, that particularly to try to help your own children. If you see
Yes.
another parent's child getting a lot of goodies, maybe you think, well, what can I do to help my child without instilling envy in them? So I think it has to have its evolutionary purpose, envy. But in this novel, envy is simply corrosive, and just it causes people to stay stuck within themselves and to distort reality, because the reality of in some ways, the Mira Wallace character is like Geneva, rather naive, doesn't know who her real friends are.
No.
And it's sort of, if she has a fall, that maybe that she's so much in her own mind that she doesn't realize her effect on others. And at the same time, you were mentioning about how people project, but where do we get our inspiration from? It's from other people. So
Mm.
maybe we're all writers here. Maybe we're continually recycling the world around us. I have had that happen, though, where people will believe that a character is modeled on them, and it would never even occur to me. And in fact, it might even be modeled on someone else.
Oh, yeah.
But people very often, and I think you have to think, though, well, that must be alive to them then. The problem in the novel is that people think that because this novelist is sometimes using the speech patterns and the way people dress from her hometown, Bingle, that she is somehow, using them out of some kind of cruel act of appropriation, rather than that.
Yep.
That's how inspiration works, is we use the world around us.
Well, and there's a couple of things too that novelists I've heard from many who write. Number one, the reaction, like you said, people coming up and saying, "Hey, that character was based on me," and the novelist is like, "I don't even know you, or know you well enough to do that." The other thing, though, is that novelists several times, and they will say, as I'm writing a character, that character is telling me what I'm writing down. In other words, the character brings on a life of his or her own. And as you're writing, maybe you had an idea in mind for that character, maybe you had a speech, but the character goes in a different direction than you thought simply by writing and fleshing out that character. That character is telling you where he or she wants to go. Did you find that when you were writing?
Oh, I found that to be very much the case. I know there are some writers who disagree and say they plan everything out and they know what's going to happen. But I find, particularly with characters, once I get them in conversation with someone, then I get to know what they're really like. And I think, with a novel, there's so much orchestration going on. It seemed to me very, very difficult to know your characters so fully until, in the process of writing them, you get a sense of a deeper sense of what they want. It's the same way in the previous novel, Tabitha. Getting the sense of that character came in many ways through the writing. The same way with this character, Geneva. I used some of my own biography for her, certainly, which was helpful. But I had nothing in common with a lot of those other characters. And as soon as I let them speak and get themselves into hot water, then I figured out who they were, what was going to happen. As I worked through the novel, I had different suspects for a while. And then it took reading draft after draft, and then to realize, even early on, there was the clues were already planted. So I did do, as I mentioned earlier, tweaks, reordering, rethinking the novel, a lot of revision. But I think there's something about some of those early pages where somehow the germ of the solution for you, whether it's knowing the culprit or knowing the ending, is almost already there. And so there is that sense that the characters lead you, that your language leads you. And I think it would be deadly dull, for me anyway, if I knew where everything was going. There have to be all these little cul-de-sacs and twists and little curlicues. And
Yeah.
thoughts of the characters' thoughts that somehow propel them.
Yeah. Or and hopefully you have the skill to write yourself out of those cul-de-sacs. Get yourself. Another thing I noticed is that maybe it goes along with the every person for yourself sort of sub theme, I guess that is in the novel, and that is that structures don't come off well. The writers' conference breaks down a number of times, both of them, as far as we'll have this speaker followed by this speaker followed by this speaker, and people walk out and people come in and out, and the church doesn't do very well by you. There's a character in there that sort of shows the church in a bad light, and it just seems to be another way of saying that what you mentioned earlier about Geneva's mother not getting the kind of support and help that she needed when she was in desperate need. That the structures just don't come across for people. People have to sort of, do the old bootlace thing and pick themselves up and get going.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true, and her life is Geneva's life is an example of that. She reads every self-help book that she can. She makes friends, but finally, it's luck that she finally gets this job. It's just pure luck and then she's good at it and moves forward with it. But there's always a sense of something kind of precarious within her life, certainly, throughout.
I thought that sense of precariousness was really beautifully done. Especially in the sense that, and we've been talking about that a little bit, the sense that she never really knows where she is. I mean, she keeps pushing, she keeps trying to do the detective thing, and she's sure so many times, and then 5 minutes later, not so sure. And so there is this sense, one wrong move and you'll be totally off, or something really bad's can happen. And of course, we have no idea what actually is going to take place, which is, again, part of the skill of Lee Upton. And you must read her new novel, everyone, because that's all we've been talking about for the past almost 40 minutes. And we haven't
even... John, before we go,
yes,
the movie that you were talking about is The Big Sleep.
The Big Sleep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what I was saying, for those of you who had fallen asleep, was that Raymond Chandler was drafting the novel in real time while the film was being shot. He had a 1 or 2 page. That's the way they used to do it in movies, 1 or 2 page treatment, and then he was fleshing it out. And there were all these things that started to bristle up in the more and more complex plot arrangements he figured out. And after a while, he did not even know certain aspects. But his bosses at the studio said, Raymond, you got to give us the answer. What are we going to do? Because we got to shoot this thing, And but I think, again, Lee, I think you've shown us that uncertainty makes a really wonderful novel. Right. And yours is, and I want people to read it. The novel is Wrongful, and Lee Upton is the author, and you're going to have a wonderful, just dirty, evil, envious time. I very much, Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's delightful to talk to you both. I really appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Or log into our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
Our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.